Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's monthly Powers in Play. And in today's edition, we're going to focus on the age of strategic power competition, the latest developments vis-a-vis Israel, the United States, Iran, Europe, much more. But before all that, let's introduce our guest for today, to include, starting on the far left, Brigadier General in Reserve, Dr. Amnon Sofrin, formerly the Chief of Intelligence at Mossad, as well as a senior officer at the IDF Intelligence Directorate. Next to him, Dr. Uzi Arad, formerly the Director of the National Security Council in Jerusalem, as well as the National Security Advisor, a Mossad Division Chief, and much more. 3 points. To my right, Ambassador Danya Yalon, formerly Israel's ambassador to the United States, as well as Deputy Foreign Minister, and last but certainly not least, our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. And right now I'd like to start with a focus on the complexities related to Iran. One of the key issues that need to be taken into account is, what is the American objective? There is a strategy obviously at play here. The diplomatic discourse, the various deployments in the region, but what is the end goal and for what purpose is all materializing in front of our eyes in the manner in which we can observe it? General, we'll start with you.
Okay. I think that the Americans, first of all, are aiming to dismantle Iran from its nuclear capabilities. I think this is the most important issue, and this is the most important goal that the Americans just now designed. In addition to that, they speak, but not very loudly, on changing the regime. But it's not something that can be done only by air attacks. That needs to have two vectors. The first one is boots on the ground, means American troops on the ground trying to take over Tehran, which is a huge area and a huge country, and it's very complicated. And they have the experience of trying to release the hostages on 1980 by President Carter, and they failed, as you remember. We all remember, of course. And the next issue is that you need the people to get out in the streets and to protest, and a lot of people, and of course, some of the armed forces to join them. Because without that, nothing can happen. So I think that what can be achieved now is mainly some formula that will enable the Americans to present some achievement, that the Iranians will give up enriching uranium or to a certain level, or something like that, and to dismantle Iran from its nuclear capabilities and to postpone the idea of achieving nuclear capabilities for an undefined period of time.
Thank you, General. Dr. Arad, I'd like you to zoom out a little bit in this context, since we do have the CRINK, China, Iran, Russia, North Korea. We see this alliance of sorts. It's not a pure alliance, but it's an alliance of strategic unanimity in their aspiration to bring about the downfall of the West, with chief focus, of course, on the United States as the leading dominant power within that context, and Iran, which plays a significant role in that, is the weakest link. Is there a correlation to the West's push against the Islamic Republic of Iran to decouple, so to speak, this so-called Eastern axis?
You know, it is not cast in iron in a way that this combination of nations, China, Russia, Iran, would be a firm kind of a coalition. There is some weakness there, and we've seen it before when the Russians were distanced themselves from being supporters of Iran. But at the moment, it looks like China will lend some support to Iran. It has been assisting with aircraft. It needs the oil, so it will give some assistance and position itself behind Iran. Russia, too, is doing Iran's bidding in some extent. So the confrontation would have to be with these three. And other proxies in the region are also part of the game. Yes, indeed, it is a contest between, let's say, the West and the Western powers, which are not also uniform in everything, against those opposed. But if that is the case, then now it is the test of the United States to lead the pack and take firm action. That means that either they would succeed and obtain what had been said would be their goal, that at least as far as the Iranian nuclear program, it's been decisively put to halt. Not just so it has to be on a number of items with a strong verification, and with implied commitment to do something if they take or cheat or anything. If they will do that, it would be, in a way, can be termed as a victory, and that would be also given to the credit to the West. It is a Western success. But on the other hand, if it would not accomplish this without use of force, then it may come to the point of using force, and that's a much more difficult thing. And that is one of the reasons why there is reluctance to jump to this Toller order in a way and to defeat Iran to the point of replacing the government. That would be a major victory, say, for the West, but it will be very costly and very uncertain.
Indeed. Well, Ambassador Ayalon, the Iranians have been quite significant in their support to Russia, but we see over the last year or so that the Russians have managed to rehabilitate their self-sustainability or production of munitions within their own country. They're still very much reliant on North Korea, also for manpower and munitions, but when it comes specifically to the Islamic Republic of Iran, the Iranians have become redundant since they did transfer much of the technologies for infrastructure in Russia proper. The question here is, to what degree is therefore Russia unmotivated to come to Iran's aid, as was the case when Rising Lion, the operation, the 12-day war, was sparked on June 13th of last year. But at the same time, we also look at the Chinese being heavily invested in infrastructure in Iran, roughly $400 billion for a 25-year period to gain control of much of the vital infrastructure there. We see photo ops of the Chinese chief of defense alongside that, or rather the previous, since he was incarcerated as of late, but the former chief of defense of China, alongside the commander of the Iranian military, joining for a photo op with the J-20 aircraft of China with the intention to sell it to Iran. There are reports, which General Sofrin has mentioned in our previous productions time and again, about various cargo aircraft coming from China into Iran with dual-use components for the purpose of ramping up their surface-to-air capabilities. All of that is being done with limitations. Now, we're not seeing the stream of aircraft flying in, rather less than 10 aircraft altogether. But nonetheless, when we're talking about sphere of influence in that context, one may evaluate that, we can have some reason to believe that in the event that Iran falls, the sphere of influence of China and Russia in this context is going to be devastating.
Yes, well, Jonathan, there is a marked difference between China and Russia these days in terms of their objectives they set to themselves, in terms of the confidence that they exhibit. And of course, this comes out of stems from the capabilities. China is an ascending power. Russia is a descending power. Putin and Russia has a much bigger fish to fry, and that is the Ukraine war. How do they get out of the Ukraine war when they are ahead? And it seems to be very murky now for the for the Russians, especially if now the Europeans, which are now getting hold of themselves and are increasing their assistance to the Ukraine. Of course, still debated if Washington will lend a helping hand or just continue, I would say, playing with Putin and Zelensky. I'm not sure that Trump himself and his administration has set a specific goal, whether they would like the war in Ukraine to end with a Ukraine achievement, or let the Russians, make the get all the credits. So this puts Russia in a very vulnerable position, especially vis-a-vis Iran, as you mentioned. Iran outlived its usefulness for Russia at this point, and since they already almost are losing Syria as well, it seems like that they are taking an arm's length distance now from the Middle East because of their own issues, and they would concentrate on Eastern Europe. And first of all, to preserve the Russian Empire. China, on the other hand, is very much dependent on Iran, especially for energy, but also China is now throwing its weight throughout the world and trying to show to allies and foes alike that they can match the United States. Hence, we saw this joint, marine exercises just recently in the Gulf of Hormuz, something which is very, very dangerous because they're just in the way of all the big American armada. And of course, they are lending all the political support that they get to Iran. China is also very mindful of what will happen in Taiwan. So they're watching very closely whether Trump will make good on his promises and his threats to Iran, or maybe he will just be the first one to shy away from an action, which may be very bad for Taiwan specifically, but also on the power play between China and the United States. So this is the critical thing when we look at the Iran issue today. The next, what we should look, the perspective should be, is it a Chinese Pax or Pax Americana?
I was under the impression that they delayed the joint naval maneuver to an undisclosed date yet. But nonetheless, they do intend to do that, and they've had plenty of joint exercises together. Mr. Owen, naturally, the Iranians are very concerned with regard to the future of the regime, particularly, but their ability to withstand any type of kinetic confrontation. Both General Sofrin and Dr. Arad have mentioned that there are limitations to the military engagement in Iran without a proper ground force to back it up and to bring about certain challenges or changes that would then bring about a potential regime change in the immediate period of time. But nonetheless, when we're talking about past scenarios, if we take Colin Powell as an chief of defense formerly in the United States, who had the engagement here in the region also to take into account the deployments, and there was a large or a very significant discussion about whether or not to employ just aircraft carriers at the time in the vicinity, or to actually deploy certain military contingents, and ultimately the latter prevailed. But in this context today, we do see a second aircraft carrier coming into the theater. We do see an entire strike group coming alongside it. Is there not a scenario in which all of this buildup, beyond the naval forces, but also the aircraft carrier, Israel as an aircraft carrier, Jordan, we see the force buildup also in a couple of other countries in the region, all of this signals to Iran that we can employ a campaign over a period of time rather than a surgical type of strike.
So, Jonathan, you brought up several points. First of all, the founder of the two-carrier task force doctrine was Joe Biden. Right after October the 7th, he sent both the Ford and the Eisenhower to this region in order to deter both Iran and Hezbollah from joining the fight. Israel at the time was in an inferior position. It was on the ropes, didn't yet decide whether to pursue the campaign in Gaza or bring the center of gravity up north. And Biden managed to stabilize the situation. So Trump did not invent these two.
Wasn't it Bush the son who had two aircraft carriers operational at the same time, both in Iraq and Afghanistan during the invasions?
Because you had two different regions, two different.
Yeah, but they operated in both theaters.
Yes, but people make too much of the carriers. Yes, you have fighter squadrons there, but this is more a show of the flag. The Tomahawk missiles out of both the destroyers and the submarines cause much more damage than the fighters. Fighters can be brought down. Pilots can be taken captive. It happened with Goodman in Syria in 1983. And the comparisons are not accurate because when Bush Sr. tried to evict Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait, he failed. There was no deterrence. Saddam stayed there until the Americans went from Desert Shield to Desert Storm. But let's go to this current situation and find out where there can be a meeting of minds between Khamenei and Trump. What does Trump want? What is his agenda and time frame? He wants an achievement before the November midterm elections, and this achievement can be framed only in terms of trade and economy. Lifting the sanctions as the price for Iranian submission is good for America, not only for Iran. From Trump's point of view, the more trade, the more investment in the new Iran and the stability in the Gulf, because if Iran does not have nuclear weapons or even nuclear aspirations, Saudi Arabia can rest assured that it can go on with its programs. So does Turkey, so will Egypt and Israel. So for Trump, we always talked up here about a credible military threat. So he is building this credible military threat, but for what? For what we talked about here. He cannot be sure that if there are boots on the ground, they can be extricated before November. It's a gamble for him. So if there is a formula, for instance, we talked about enrichment. The Iranians say that they must have their sovereign enrichment. If, for instance, they take it to Russia and just like an embassy, they have an extraterritorial plot of land, the enrichment will go on in Russia in an Iranian facility, just like the North Korean facility in Syria. One can find a compromise here.
There is some advance in the talks between the Americans and the Iranians. We don't know what that actually means, but there were a couple of reports on some type of advance. However, the Americans seem to be quite deliberate and uncompromising in their approach this time around. General Zolfin, regardless I to a certain degree disagree with one of the aspects, and that is there is quite a significant power disparity between the United States of the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s to their capabilities today. And it's quantum leaped several levels above to engage in a theater without an adversarial air force grants you something particularly post-June.
But you have to compare means to ends. not to the means of some
No,
other.
I agree. And yet, the power disparity between Iran and the United States here is quite significant. And despite the fact that the Iranians have rehabilitated much of their launchers, they are still very much limited in their capacity to challenge both the United States and Israel in this context. And there are other actors in the region that have also pledged to join the fight. But General Sofrin, looking at the end goal, let's say that President Trump says, yes, I want regime change. Is there not a scenario, as two distinguished senior Mossad officers sit here, you are one of them, is there no context to a operation on the ground with clear conjunction with various Iranian forces on the ground, opposition forces that can be armed, that can be utilized for the purpose of being the ground forces, so-called, in a scenario where the United States is unwilling to place boots on the ground?
It's always a possibility. The Americans will decide to launch ground forces on the ground, special forces, to try to get to Mr. Khamenei, to pick him up, just like did in Venezuela with Maduro, and to take him into custody to the United States and to trial him. That will be a great achievement. What comes next? Who is going to replace Khamenei if he's gone? The Americans cannot dictate in Iran, just like they did in Venezuela, who is going to rule Iran.
Why not?
Because there is what we call kind of capacity which is given. You can't bring on the son of the Shah to rule Iran because nobody knows him. He didn't live in Iran for more than 50 years. He's not related to Iran in anything. Okay? He doesn't have anything to do with Iran, with the current Iran.
Let's go theologically for one moment. 12 Shia Islam, we have Ayatollah Ali Khamenei as the interlocutor between the so-called Islamic Ayatollah regime and the El Mahdi, somewhere roaming the earth. The moment you take him out of the equation, not necessarily pick him up, but eliminate him, does that not disrupt the beliefs of all those millions upon millions that are supportive of the regime?
Let me ask you a question. When Mr. Khomeini passed away, what have changed inside Iran? Nothing. Okay? That means they have their own, what we call, mechanism that will choose who is going to be the next leader. It's one of the theological senior clerks in Iran, something that can match Khamenei or think otherwise, but nevertheless, he will be a radical Shiite. And that doesn't mean Iran that the regime change is going to succeed, even if they take Khamenei out. In order to try to change the equation, you need something more radical than only picking up Khamenei and taking him, or eliminating him or taking him into custody into the United States. That means that you have to try to pick something or somebody that will be acceptable on the people of Iran, that will try to change the equation. He's going to face a lot of problems if something like that happens. Because the people of Iran, and part of them at least, and of course the RGC and all the other mechanisms, the armed mechanisms, will not accept him as a leader. And this is something that will take many years ahead.
And yet, if you utilize the Air Force, Dr. Arad, and take out every symbol of the regime, every RGC base, besiege base, and every other type of structure and amassing troops related to the regime, it will grant the various localities in Iran the capacity to rise up and open the door, so to speak, or the gates to Western actors to come and finish the job.
Well, technically, there may be some new types of opportunities that did not exist before. The very strategy that Israel has been employing of decapitation, and that is to say, to eliminate the entire leadership of be it the Hezbollah at one point, or the Hamas, or striking at Iran, is something that can be repeated. It is the product of a certain type of information and capacities, but it had been seen that it can work. So America can do that, and what will result, one doesn't know, but you can put it, and you do not then need necessarily to target symbols of the government. You target the government itself, the individuals. That can be done. By the way, the supreme leader, being old and sick, was aware of the fact that his departure from this world was closed. And I think that he did take some measures to give his son certain authorities. He tried to plan that. But whether it will work or is that the legal system, I don't know. But the entire leadership can be targeted per se, and in so doing, create a void that could be then replaced as a transitional unifying element, the Shah. He himself does not claim anymore. He does not want to say, he wants to be the facilitator of a kind of a transformation that would lead to, say, elections and so forth.
Well, in the Munich Security Conference, he did mention a constitutional monarchy. So it seems like his appetite is growing.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that he can fulfill that role. Incidentally, we've seen that in other parts of the world. You have a transitional process before you bring back either royalty or other legitimate leaders. So that could be attempted too. Both actions do not call for boots on the ground.
May I interject for a second? The best way to have a radical policy change within the regime and perhaps bring about the collapse of the regime is to have a successor who is going to have a major departure from the predecessor. Gorbachev, de Klerk, Sadat, Trump. We didn't have regime change in Washington from Biden to Trump, but there is a radical change. And the first move after Khamenei is gone should not be an American expert or someone in exile being put in place.
The radical change between the majority of Iranians, which are classified as the most Western in essence, in their education and the upbringing prior to the Ayatollah regime, the revolution of '79, the current regime, I mean, it is years light.
But what leverage do the masses have over their rulers? They don't.
A lot of B-2s and B-52s and other types of munitions that can be introduced into the theater, and who knows what is happening. We know what we barely know what happens when Title 10 is introduced. Title 50 is off the charts. It's off the books. So we'll have to wait and see. But Ambassador Ayalon, let's look at the diplomatic angle. Is there a scenario where the Iranians accept all of America's demands in the current context, as we do see that under President Trump right now, he is resolute on seeing zero enrichment in Iran, irrespective of what they ask for?
I doubt very much, Jonathan, that the regime in Iran can capitulate totally to the demands of the Americans because it will undermine their own authority. Khamenei himself may lose not only face, but power, and this in itself may ignite an internal unrest, especially if we will see some forces from the regime which would turn against Khamenei, so it could turn into a very chaotic situation. But Jonathan, I think that the Americans right now, and they look into the situation, what they have in mind is Afghanistan and Iraq, where they tried regime change and failed miserably. In the case of Iraq, they had a champion by the name of Ahmed Chalabi, who actually encouraged the Americans and said that he could bring back order into Iraq. And of course, nobody really in Iraq thought of him as the potential leader. Here, we may have a different situation where Reza Pahlavi may be much more recognized in Iran than Chalabi was. Also, there is a tradition. Iran, unlike Iraq, had a semblance of democracy, although it was a very tight regime of the former Shah. But one cannot underestimate or ignore the combustion, the internal combustion of the Iranian people. Just like in 1979, which they basically supported the revolution, not so much as Islamists, but against the oppressive Shah. So here we may have, again, if you just push the right levers, you can really bring about an internal change. And I think this is what is very much debated in Washington right now.
Senior policy planner in the United States and I had a conversation about something related. And I threw out the remark, trying the same thing over and over again and expecting different results is the root cause of stupidity, as Einstein once mentioned. And he said, yes, unless you do it better. So there is a third option where you do engage and you learn from your mistakes, and within that lessons learned, you implement a better strategy that goes beyond the confinements of your past weakness. And this is not a zero-sum game. We do need to put things on the table here when we're talking about that. General Sofrin, I'd like to humor for one moment Dr. Arad's mention of decapitation. In the event that decapitation happens, and we did see and there was the paradigm or the misconception where, if you eliminate one leader, the most radical of sorts may substitute him. We saw that this was a concern deeply rooted within Israel's security establishment, particularly also with regard to Hezbollah's Secretary General, the late Hassan Nasrallah. Then the decapitation occurred. We had the 17th of September Beeper operation. Subsequently, 10 days later, exactly on the 27th, the elimination of Hassan Nasrallah alongside his predecessor, who was also immediately decapitated. And ultimately, we came to Naim Qasim, who is far from the most radical of sorts. And we do see a disoriented organization, more than a year later, unable to come to terms with what actually happened. Now, the fact of the matter is this is a case study that needs to be further evaluated and considered thoughtfully about the various psychological implications of such a maneuver. But in the event that something like this happens in Tehran, can we not find a scenario in which a disorientation, as was also the case on the 13th, 14th, and 15th of June, when they just didn't understand what happened to their ranks. This could be reintroduced in a much more forceful way and ultimately find an alternative that would bring about the wishful change that we're all aspiring for.
There is a big change between eliminating the head of a terror organization and the leader of a country. Mm-hmm. If you take, for example, from the history when was a Palestinian Islamic Jihad, okay? When the head of this organization was eliminated, the organization fell down for a period of time, for several years, because its successor was not good enough and strong enough, and they couldn't hold the organization, and it fell down. When you speak about a country, it's more complicated, because there are a lot of people that have a lot of interests. If you speak about, for example, for the IRGC, they are dependent on the leader, because the power comes out of the leader. And it's not only power by, weapons and ammunition, it's also economical, mainly economical projects. And this is very important and very strong. And they will do anything to defend their assets and not to give it as if nothing happened, far away. And that means that they will join hands and try to, first of all, to protect the current leader or his successor, if it's going to be elected by the people that are responsible for that within the Iranian mechanism. And therefore, I don't see any change coming out because of these interests, unless you succeed in eliminating all these assets, mainly the economical ones, and rule them out from their capacity. That will bring some change or give some hope. Otherwise, I don't see any major change coming out, only by what we call air attacks or something like that.
Having roughly 1/3 of the US military currently present in order to bring about such a change, who knows? They can go for the next 10 or 20 substitutes. Time will tell. We're drawing near to the end of the program, and I'd like to give each and every one of you the opportunity to have a closing analysis for the near future. We're not prophets, but we can still utilize the data at our disposal to try and evaluate what's next. Dr. Arad, we'll start with you.
Well, we are still in the midst of a crisis which has to unfold. I don't think that there is a predetermined decision to go on the attack, but it may come to it. And I think we're nearing that point, that either the objective of that has been set to reduce Iran and to degrade or eliminate Iran's nuclear program is accomplished, and this will bring to an end the current crisis, waiting for the next one to evolve. But let me come back on the issue of incapacitation or the decapitation. Yes, but we did have in the Middle East a series in which the elimination of the leader came from within. Remember Sadat? It was done internally. Pakistan internally, in other countries. So why a change that is brought about violently from inside would be any different from something that is being caused from the outside? You can see some of the consequences being similar.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Mr. Olin?
Well, for 15 years, when Israel was very young, for 15 years, Gamal Abdel Nasser was its arch enemy. And twice, in 1956, along with Britain and France, and in 1967, as a result of his own failures, Israel tried to depose Nasser and couldn't, even though Nasser submitted his resignation and was called upon by the population to come back. He then died out of natural causes. And therefore, one can bring about some change, but not the change. And hopefully, because we are going to have the celebrations of the 250th anniversary of the United States come July, we are going to have the World Cup. We are going to have Donald Trump's own birthday party in June. One cannot see President Trump get involved in a situation he doesn't know how to get out of. If he gets a good diplomatic solution, he will declare a victory and go on to other problems. Okay.
Ambassador Ayalon?
Well, I think we went too far in order to get to some kind of a, faulty diplomatic solution. Because first of all, the very specific threats of Trump, and he doesn't want to be called this taco again, Trump always chickens out. But there is another factor, which is the scope or the enormity of the savagery and the killing and the murdering of the Iranian people. We see it unfolding every day. So that brings legitimacy on the one hand. And we have to remember that Trump, in the beginning, he said his main goal was to protect the Iranian people. His threat to the Ayatollahs was stop killing the people or hanging them or all that. So this is still looming very large over everything here. But I think that the Americans have learned from their mistakes in Iraq. First of all, not betting on the wrong leader like Chalabi. They have Pahlavi, which is better. And secondly, not dismantling the military. That is what they did in Iraq. Here, I'm sure that the colleagues of Uzi and Amnon in the CIA are working very hard to find some people from within. And you're right, they will protect themselves because it's their own livelihood. But if they are given the opportunity to go to the other side and still be protected, there may be a chance here.
20 seconds.
I think that the American administration is giving priority to a diplomatic solution, first of all. And the Iranians will give up to some extent, not totally, not surrender, not wave the white flag, but they will give up concessions. And I believe that this will end this crisis without using what we call military force.
Well, time will tell. I think to the contrary. I think the military buildup that is currently in the region would have sufficed for diplomatic discourse. But General Sofrin, Dr. Arad, Ambassador Ayalon, Mr. Oren, thank you very much for all of your insights. I'd like to thank you at home as well. Until our next edition from here in Jerusalem. Shalom.